Okay, you're on.
Very good. Good evening, everyone. I am Michael J. Quaranta, the mayor of the city of Newcastle, and this is the City of Newcastle Board of Adjustment public hearing for Monday, November 9, 2020. We're meeting electronically at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom. Let me ask the other members of the panel to identify themselves and record their attendance, starting first with Mr. Athey and then Mr. Lasko.
Good evening, David Athey, city engineer.
And Dan Lasko, city attorney, city solicitor.
Okay. I also note present is Jeff Bergstrom, our city building official, and a couple of other city staff folks who are taking notes and recording. I appreciate their attendance here tonight as well. Let me read the public notice that was disseminated in several different publications announcing these proceedings. Number one, an application has been filed by Newcastle United Methodist Church, located at 510 Delaware Street, Newcastle, Delaware 19720. They are the owner and applicant, regarding a property located at 510 Delaware Street, tax parcel number 21-015.10-080, appealing the June 11, 2020 decision of the Historic Area Commission denying the use of vinyl replacement windows on side and rear of the church building. And number two, continuance of an application filed by John DeMundi Enterprises LLC, 300 West 7th Street, Newcastle, Delaware 19720, for a property located at 300 West 7th Street, Newcastle, Delaware, parcel number 21-014.000-396, seeking a special exception to permit the expansion of an existing self-service storage facility use in the downtown Gateway DG zoning district. For purposes considering these applications, the Board of Adjustment will hold a public hearing on Monday, November 9, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom video. Let's go in order and take the first item that was posted. Is the applicant from Newcastle United Methodist Church present?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. That sounds like Mike. Mike, is that you?
That's me, Mike Bellafour.
Okay.
I'm chairman of the trustees of Newcastle United Methodist Church.
Okay. Mike, hold on one second. Mr. Lasko. Well, first of all, Mike, do you have anybody with you, or is it just you?
The pastor's here, Pastor Eck, and Kim Bergmuller, and Carolyn Jensen.
Great. Okay. Who will be speaking on behalf of the application? Just you, Mike, or
That would be me.
Okay. All right.
would-
In that case, okay. In that case, I have to ask.
Perhaps I will. This is Ray.
All right, right. All right. In that case, then I'll have the solicitor swear in you both. Dan?
Before I do that, Mr. Mayor, I'll note for the record that advertisement of this hearing was published in the News Journal and the Newcastle Weekly, and the property was posted. Affidavits of publication and photographs of the posting are a part of the record. That being said, let me swear in the two parties. I got the first name, Mr. Bellafour, but I did not get the second name. Could you provide that to me, please?
Yes, Raymond Eck, E-C-K.
All right. Mr. Bellafour and Mr. Eck, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, or nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
I do.
Very good.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay. Michael, if you want to proceed with a description of the application and your point of view, that would be helpful.
Okay. We decided to replace the remainders of the windows on the lower part of the church in the rear. Half of the windows are already vinyl replacement windows. So from there, we were told that we should replace the windows with wooden windows. Now, the problem is that, let me just put it this way. These windows, the vinyl windows have already been made. And that's why I filed this appeal, because whether they're installed or not, it looks like I'm going to have to pay for these windows. All right, I had some photos. Where did Kim go? That I wanted to show you to illustrate what I'm talking about as far as the vinyl. These, oh, here we go. Okay.
Yep, we have, I think we've got a series of pictures that Kim is
All right,
sharing.
the first,
Yep.
you stop right there. This first photo is the alleyway from the front of the Church of Delaware Street. That is the main administrative office. The window that you're looking at is vinyl, as are all the windows down the entire left side of the building, offices, bathrooms, kitchens, all the way to the rear. Okay, how about the next slide? All right.
Can I stop you there, please, Mr. Belfort?
Sure.
Going back to that
Yes.
first picture, is that window that you say is vinyl now, is that one of the ones you intend to replace?
No, that's an existing vinyl window.
And is it visible from the street?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
That's what it takes from the street. So you
Okay,
can
got it.
actually see the window. It's an existing vinyl window. It's been in there for over 20 years.
Thank you.
Okay. If we can go to the next, this was taken from the street. This is the right side of the building. These first three windows that you're looking at on the bottom, they're all vinyl. And you can see them from the street, okay? They're existing. Beyond that, you can see another window better. That's one of the windows that need to be replaced. Could you go to the next slide there?
Mike, before you move on from that,
Yes.
though, I'm
Oh,
sorry, so,
sorry.
okay, that's okay. The three, Kim, if you could roll back, thank you. Okay, so you said the three on the bottom are currently, they've been replaced some time ago.
Yes.
And they are vinyl,
Right.
okay. And you said there is
Right.
another one there that does need replacing?
What's that? I'm sorry?
Did you say that there is a one of the top three, or is there another window?
No,
on
not
that?
the top windows.
Uh-huh, okay,
Not the top windows. Those windows are still in good condition.
okay.
The
There-
lower windows are the ones that none of them work. They're in really bad condition.
Okay.
Let's go to the next slide.
I'm sorry, Mr. Belfort, I'm still clear. The three windows that
Oh.
are currently vinyl on that picture, they're all currently vinyl and you just want to replace them in kind with other vinyl windows, am I right?
No, I don't want to replace them. Those windows are in there. They're just fine. I
Okay,
just want to replace the wooden windows that haven't been done.
And where is in this picture, are there any windows you intend to replace?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, but you can't even see them. It's toward the back. There
Is
is
it
a
right
window.
next to where that door is?
Yes.
It looks like there's two windows there, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay,
those are
and
two
both of
the
those
windows.
both of those you hope to replace with the vinyl clad windows, yes?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's, as you go through
I'm
these,
just
as you go through these
establish-
pictures, I'd like you to identify those that are existing vinyl, those that you are going to
Okay.
replace. Okay, so it helps me understand
right.
where we are.
Okay,
Can I
good.
clarify something before we move on?
Sure.
Okay, so when the church was first built, years ago, I'm assuming all the windows were wood because vinyl didn't even exist. So,
Well, I have a document here that says that these windows and the fellowship hall in the back or whatever, all these areas were built between 1954 and 1956. And they are the original windows.
okay, even better. Thank you for clarifying. So the ones built in the 1950s, is it a safe assumption they were all wood?
Yes,
Okay, I believe what you said a few minutes ago was you replaced, or the church replaced roughly half of them with vinyl. So I'm assume that means as of today, roughly half are vinyl and roughly half are still the original wood.
yes.
Okay, you're not intending to replace all of the remaining wood. You just want to replace some of the ones that are wood. So you'll have, just like 2/3, 3/4, whatever, will be vinyl if this is approved, but then you're still going to have some that are still the old wood.
Not on the bottom of the church. These these are the remainder of the windows. There are 17 windows that are already vinyl, and I wanted to replace 18 wooden windows all across the bottom. And I have some more photos that will show you this. I just
So-
wanted, could you go up a little bit with the next photo? Right there with that building there's an alleyway. This area, on the left side of this alleyway, they're all vinyl windows that are already done. On the right side of the alleyway are the wooden windows, some wooden windows that I want to replace.
They can't be seen from the street,
No, they can't be seen from the street.
and they're not part of the original church. These windows are all in the addition that were built in the 50s and or
All this,
54 to 56.
okay. If you go to the next one, I have two more photos, I believe. And this photo was taken, this is the parking lot, the back of the church, and this is a row of the windows, probably the biggest row that I wanted to replace. They're all warped. They don't go up and down. They're in really, really bad condition, and we wanted to try to replace them, but I guess we never even get a thought because us being in the historic district was news to me. When I came in the meeting, I just like, I said, well, we're not in the historic district. And he said, oh, yes, you are. You've been there since like 2015. So, okay. Could I go to the next slide?
Before you do, Mr. Belfort, I have a question for you. Are
Yes,
these windows on this picture, not the new one here, the last one, Marika? If you'll go back.
yes.
Okay, are those visible from the street?
No, not from Delaware Street, or actually, no, you can't. That's the back of the parking lot. You have to come off a side street and come in the thing there. So you can't see any of these.
You can't see them
From
from
the-
any public street, am I right?
No, you can't.
Okay, thank you.
You have to come down a long driveway to actually see these. It's the way that the direction that's gone is, toward a side street.
Mike, hold on one second. So Dan, if
Yeah.
if you entered the city off of 273, came in down Delaware Street, crossed the traffic light at 6th and got to the stop sign at 5th, the church sits on the corner to your right at that stop sign. The post office would be to your left. The library would be on the other corner. If you turned right on 5th, you can only turn right because 5th is a one-way. If you went down about a half a block, there's an entrance off 5th, which is a long driveway, which takes you behind a home. And there is plenty of parking probably for about 35, 40 cars in total is the parking lot kind of makes a horseshoe and then exits back onto Fifth Street. There's a tall fence that is a privacy fence that I believe is, there's different sections of it because there are different adjacent properties, but it's the back of different residential properties that would, if anybody had sight line, it would be from those residential properties to the back of the church, but is not visible from a public street. Hope that
Thank you.
helps.
Yeah,
Yep.
You want to go on or?
Yep.
yes, yeah, please.
Okay, let's go to the next one. The reason I just took this one, this is one of the windows I want to replace. And like I say, it's a wooden window. It's almost 70 years old. It's swollen and warped really bad. It doesn't operate at all. And it's covered with an aluminum storm window. That's not very historical, but, and that's what all these windows look like. They're 3 feet wide and 5 feet tall and get really in bad condition. The only other thing that I wanted to say is, if you had a house and you needed windows, so you didn't have enough money, so you did half of the windows in that house. When you went to finish the house, would you go out and put a totally different type of window in that house? It doesn't make any sense to me. And like I say, as far as I'm concerned, as far as we're concerned, we're not talking about anything historic. These buildings were built in 1954. That's not historic. And it's the back of the church. It's not an eyesore. We're not making anything out of it. We're just trying to do some improvements. So other than that, I pretty much thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you. Pastor Eck, anything you'd like to add before we move on to Mr. Bergstrom?
Yes, I would like to know when the church building itself was declared to be in the historic district.
So I think I'll take a first shot at that, and then Mr. Lasko or Mr. Athey can comment. There are a couple of different historic zones, and I think that's in part perhaps where some of the confusion has come in. There's a federal historic district that's been around since the city received that designation. I believe that was in the 1960s. And then the city had its own historic district that it created at some point. And upon the creation of that, created the Historic Area Commission. Jeff, you were probably maybe 30 at the time or 55 at the time. You might want to correct me on my dates, but Ray, one of the reforms that was made a few years ago was to try to make some uniformity out of these lines. It was a discussion that went on for the better part of a year. There was a Historic Area Review Commission, was in our local newspaper quite a bit. There was a lot of discussion. The church also has had, I think this predates your arrival, and I will admit this is a bit frustrating. The sign out front was another decision to buy before getting clarification of the rules. And it was only after some modification in several different meetings was permission granted to have the sign with the particular attributes that it presently has, was that approved. But that was an uncomfortable series of conversations. It has been from my perspective, and I would just say this for the record because I don't believe Mr. Athey or Mr. Lasco knows this, but I'm a parishioner at this church. But this is a little frustrating from my perspective, not as a parishioner, but as a member of local government, that this is not the first time there's an awakening and an awareness of what the rules are. This is the second time now. And I would just say this: ignorance of the law is not a defense. And for those of us who have built homes, or if you've been in the building business for decades, you know that rules change, building codes change, local government rules change, and you have to absolutely understand what the rules are before you can proceed. I'll pause there, Mr. Bergstrom.
Did you have a question?
No, I'd like to know, I mean, are the dates, the pastor asked about, the different historic areas, when
Right.
there was uniformity and when the church was put into the city's, the municipality's historic area.
I believe that was 2016 going into 2017 when the federal district buildings, some of them that were listed in the original application for the federal district, were all placed in the city's historic area commission purview and had to follow the new rules.
What frustrates us is that, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I've had to have a lot of work done in the place. And this is always brought up into me when we vote on anything. And we just had no idea that we were in that sign. Nobody in 2.5 years, nobody ever mentioned that it was, we were in the historic district. I mean, as a matter of fact, if somebody had mentioned it, I wouldn't even have bothered, because I would have known that I don't think that the Historic Society would have shot it down. So, really, and right now that I know, I won't do anything. I have a big job with the stained glass windows. Before I do anything, I'll make sure that I run it by these, the historic people. But we didn't intentionally do anything here and the communication is terrible. Somebody needs to tell you something. We have no written documentation. Is there any kind of written documentation for this?
Mike, we don't. Mike, the city. There were countless public meetings. There was plenty of communication that went out through all sorts of means in our local publications to make the public aware. Goodness, had somebody simply, I used to be a member of the Historic Area Commission. I chaired the Planning Commission. I served for 2 years on the city council. I'm the mayor. Had somebody even asked me, I'd have been happy to answer their question or direct them to Mr. Bergstrom. Rules change.
That's what the thing. I think some of the members knew, but like there are 9 trustees. We didn't know, and I really do apologize that we have always taken that into consideration, but we just didn't know.
Okay, Jeff. Jeff, your take on we answered. That was a very long answer to Pastor X's question. Ray, did you get the answer or not?
I did, but I do have a question, and this is not intended to throw anyone under the bus. When the sign was being planned out front in 2018, we were already 2 years into the historic district. But in speaking to Mr. Bergstrom out front, he advised me that we were not in the historic district because there was a question as to where we were going to place the sign. And we wanted it to look nice, very nice for the city. But he said, you can put the sign wherever you want to put it. You can put a huge sign in the cemetery if you want, because you are not in the historic district. So based on that, and having received no notification, even though there were meetings, we went ahead and contacted Advanced Windows, and they were the ones that applied for the permit to have these windows replaced. So had we known at the time from Mr. Bergstrom that you can't even put this type of sign up here, then we would not have proceeded to purchase these windows.
Appreciate
I
that.
don't know if Mr. Bergstrom, do you remember our conversation out front? I have nothing in writing. I only have my word.
That's not exactly my recollection, but time fades memories, so.
So
Perhaps-
Jeff, all right, Jeff, what, all right, well, let me, Mike or Pastor Ray, if you don't have any other questions, I'm going to ask Mr. Bergstrom. We might have a few questions for Mr. Bergstrom before we proceed. Do you have any other comments that you'd like to make?
Just that our only desire has always been to fit in with the landscape of the historic district, even though that we were not aware that we physically were in the historic district. We want to be good stewards. We've been around a long time. We've been here 200 years, the church building itself. But where the windows are going to be replaced, as Mike has said, are in the addition that was built back in the 1950s. And they're really kind of replacing and upgrading what was already in the back from aluminum to vinyl. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this evening and have you reconsider what we've covered here.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bergstrom, could you summarize? I went back and I read the notes from the Historic Area Commission, but could you summarize your view and or any of the comments made by the Historic Area Commission real quickly, briefly?
There was some discussion about the efficacy of using vinyl windows on the back of the building when already part of the windows were vinyl. The most important part of the fabric of that property is the church building itself, and especially the stained glass windows and, you know, the main fenestration, the door in the front of the church. In fact, I worked with the church years ago to get the doors to swing out and still retain the historic fabric, not have in swinging doors on such a public place. But and I thought we were working pretty well. The signs come and go, modest windows and rear additions come and go. The church, the fabric for that building is the church itself. And I'm not going to say any more than that. I think the best of intentions sometimes lead to, you know, minor calamities, but there's nothing particularly onerous about replacing the rest of the windows, in my opinion, that were replaced with vinyl also. So I'd rather see the windows open, have a healthier building, more fresh air for our indoor air quality concerns, and the egress concerned. I'd like to see the windows operational, not swollen shut.
Good. Mr. Athey, then Mr. Lasko.
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. I'm still kind of trying to get my arms around the extent of all this. So if I wrote down some numbers earlier correctly, I believe that Mr. Belafort said there were 17 have already been replaced with vinyl. And I don't need exact numbers here, but is that reasonably
Yeah,
correct?
as far as I know, that's correct.
Okay, and I believe you also said that there are 18 still remaining.
Yes,
Okay, so right now, as of today, it's about half and half for all intents and purposes,
Right.
right?
right.
Okay, so of the 18 remaining, how many of those are you intending to replace with a vinyl, or how many will still be wood when you're done?
All 18.
Oh, okay, then, okay, that's what I didn't understand earlier. I was under the impression that you were going to replace, that some that are currently wood were in all right condition and you didn't need to replace. Okay,
They're all bad.
okay. Are any of these replacements on the original structure, or are they all on the addition?
They're all on the addition.
And approximately when was that addition built?
Not between 1954 and 1956.
All right, so I was writing that correctly. And I believe Mr. Lasko asked you several questions. I just, again, kind of to clarify it, it appears that none of them of the ones that'll be replaced are visible from the street?
The one photo I showed you from the one side, on the right side, there are two. They're the only two. They're toward the rear of the building.
Okay.
That was the one where I showed you 3 windows are on the one side, and then beyond that,
Oh,
just
right.
those 2.
Okay.
The rest of them do not show.
It's these right here, David. These are the
Thank you.
3. These
Okay.
3 have been replaced. It was the 2 back here that you could see potentially from a street view.
A little bit of a challenge, but okay. And I believe, actually, I had one more question, Jeff, and then I can cede it to you if that's okay. See your hand up. So I know typically on like, for variances and things like that, we always ask if you've contacted your neighbors. I don't believe that's necessarily a requirement to overturn an administrative decision, but have you talked to any, let me rephrase that, or any of the neighbors, if some of these windows would be visible by any of your neighbors who could be really concerned about the historic district, have you contacted any of them? Have you spoken with any of your neighbors?
No.
I think they would have to be walking down the street
Yeah,
next to the cemetery to actually look to the right to see them. I
there's
don't
only,
think that they could see them from their homes across the street.
Okay.
Probably the one home that has a sight line is the home that sits on the other side of the cemetery that fronts Delaware Street. And that
Right.
home belongs to Janet Carlin.
Okay. I guess really more of a comment or maybe a clarification then, because it was one of the questions, and Mr. Mayor, you tried to describe this a moment ago. When the historic district was changed, I wrote down some notes here. There were public meetings. There were a lot of other efforts to make everybody aware. But it sounds like what I didn't hear. So the city doesn't like send a letter to each address that is now included in the historic district. Is that a kind of a safe assumption?
Correct.
Okay. I don't believe I have any other questions then. Thank you.
Mr. Tracy. Or Jeff, did you have a point of clarification?
Yeah, I had one comment. I was unable to find the exact wording of the original approval if the church got permission to replace the first 17 wooden windows with vinyl windows. What they asked for, if they asked for blanket permission to change the windows to vinyl windows, they certainly would have been granted that before it was in the local district. We would have given them a building permit without regard to an opinion by the Historic Area Commission. So, and that,
replaced. It's been a long time, right? I've been here 20 years, and I think those windows were, the vinyl windows were already here. It's been quite a while.
right.
Great. Jeff, anything else?
Nope.
All right. Mr. Lasko.
Mr. Bergman,
Sir,
I'm looking at the historic area guidelines. And if I understand the guidelines and the HAC meeting minutes, this is a contributing structure, correct? Not a key building, but a contributing structure, which is a
Structure.
lesser protected structure, yes?
yes, sir.
And I'm looking at the window design guidelines. And it says that alternative materials for replacement windows are not appropriate on elevation contributing buildings that are visible from the public right of way, correct?
Correct.
And if I understand the test, and I'm looking for you to confirm it for me, only 2 out of the 18 buildings, windows rather, are visible from a public right of way. And it's the 2 that are at the back of the graveyard picture there. Am I right?
Almost exactly. The small qualifier is once there's a certain distance away from the public right of way, they're considered not to be visible. I don't know.
And are these 2 windows at that, what is that distance? And are those 2 windows at that distance?
It's unclear. We have a consultant to help.
At least
Okay.
half a block.
And I'm, now, one more thing. I'm looking at the guidelines and it says vinyl clad replacement windows are not, capital bold, not appropriate on elevations that are visible from the public right of way. So this one, so here's what's troubling me. What I'm hearing is we already got a lot of vinyl here. I'm hearing that none of this is visible from the public right of way, that alternative materials are okay on contributing buildings not visible from the public right of way. But we got these two windows toward the back of the cemetery that are theoretically a half a block away from public rights of way. Have I summarized that correctly?
I believe so.
A half a block away.
Well, those weren't my words, but
In your opinion, if you're standing on the street looking at the two windows, could you discern possibly whether they were, could you distinguish between wood and vinyl from that distance from the public right of way?
it'd be difficult with the naked eye to tell the difference.
So we'd need a telescope to tell, what you're telling me?
Just about, or binoculars. So it's right now. Are those back windows covered with aluminum right now? Most of them.
They have aluminum storm windows on them, but they're not wrapped or anything.
No. What I meant was they're behind triple tracks. You couldn't tell what was behind. If you put the aluminum storm window back on, you couldn't tell what kind of window was up there.
No.
Now, I got another question for you, Jeff. You attended the hack meeting on this application, right?
Yes, I believe I did.
And, I'm reading a lot of the comment from Mr. Chomp, Mr. Walters, Mr. Day, and they're all talking about, well, some of them are talking about, while the windows are not necessarily visible based on the guidelines, they feel alternative materials, but not vinyl, would be appropriate. Why, I'm not certain why they're distinguishing that. What is the great dislike for vinyl windows?
Want me to take a shot at that?
Yeah. Mike, you're
All right.
more. Yes.
Well, as a member of the former member of the Historic Area Commission, let me summarize it this way. There are very inexpensive, very crummy, not a professional term, really cheap and lousy looking vinyl windows that you can get for a very, very low price. There are alternative materials now that have improved substantially over the last 10 to 15 years that appear to be wood. There are shutters that are made. The only reason you can tell a shutter made of wood and a shutter made of a resin composite, the only way you can tell the difference is the resin composite one is perfect. There's absolutely no flaws. It's almost the difference between someone who's got a standard set of teeth and someone who had braces. So that's the difference. The problem that we've encountered in the past for a very long time, solicitor, is that the city decided to provide some level of acceptance of alternative materials because Williamsburg, Winterthur, the White House have all gone that way. They're energy efficient. They're frankly more expensive, or as expensive as wood, but there's less maintenance. But then there are vinyl alternatives, which are relatively inexpensive, and they look inexpensive.
The quotes that I have here, this is the estimate agreement with these people, but these windows are high performance double pane foam filled with coated. They come with a lifetime workmanship guarantee, lifetime product warranty. So, hopefully they're pretty good windows.
Can I ask this question, Mr. Belfort? I'm looking at the existing windows and they all, whether vinyl or wood, I can't tell you, but they all have these, I guess they call them muttons, they're like
Mullions.
8 panels on the top and 8 panels on the bottom. You know what I'm talking about?
The mullions.
Mullions, that's the word.
Grids.
Do your proposed replacement windows have those same mullions, same style?
Yes, yes, because they're to match these. We already have the grids on all the other windows, the other vinyl windows, the existing.
So everything's going to be uniform if you got this approved?
Yes,
Yes?
yeah, we wanted
Okay.
to match as best we could.
Okay. I don't think I have any other questions.
All right. All right. Is there, Marika, is there anyone, thank you very much. Any other follow-ups? If not, I'm going to ask Marika if there's anyone from the public present tonight that would like to offer any comments. Marika?
We have Phil Gross. And let me bring him in. Okay.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Can you
You
hear
can
me?
go ahead, Mr. Gross.
Good evening, Board and esteemed Mayor. My only two questions are, one, it was interesting your comparison of just saying no vinyl because there's so many varying grades, looks, and quality. So as a recommendation that I would have is that Mayor and, Jeff and Dave maybe look at the actual specs of the product, because what was read was just a general, me having worked in Home Depot, that's just a standard warranty guarantee, but not the actual look or feel. So my thought is, if you can't tell from the street, and Mayor and Board, if you're satisfied after looking at the actual product or the specs of it, as far as the look and material, then I would say, if it's going to blend in, there's no reason not to approve it. And the second thing is, Dan, thank you for reading the parameters of, the street view. My question is, that's a standard rule guiding any homes in the historic district. So if, again, someone had a home and the windows were not exactly seen from the street, everything's uniform. That's a uniform guideline, correct? God bless you.
Thank you.
Am I correct on that? The rule, the guideline that you read, that's pretty much standard for residential, an addition, a home, a church, anything that falls within the designated historic district. That's a flat out rule.
Public, it's typically public view. Anything in the public view.
Okay. So again, Mayor and Board, I would just suggest looking at what the product actually looks like. And as long as it has the matching mullion, after you guys are satisfied with the look of it, I don't see any problem with accepting their request.
All right, thank you for that. Any, Marika, is there anybody else from the public that would like to comment?
No, that's it for now.
All right, all right. If there's no further testimony, we could close out this part of our proceeding and move to discussion. Is there a motion to conclude the hearing?
Yeah, Your Honor,
Mr.
I'll make
Mayor.
a motion. I guess point of order. I thought in the past when we have more than one hearing, we do both. We hear all the cases and then go into the business meeting and not do the business meeting and make the second applicant wait. And I see both your heads nodding, so
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Thank you, saving me from myself. All right.
that's okay.
very good.
I will move that we close this portion of the meeting and we'll defer the business meeting until after the second application is heard.
Very good.
Second.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you kindly. All right. let me, let's proceed to the second order of business tonight. And I will read this. This is the continuance of an application filed by John DeMundi Enterprises LLC, 300 West 7th Street, Newcastle, Delaware, 19720, for a property located at 300 West 7th Street, Newcastle, Delaware, parcel number 24-014.000-396. And again, as I read this earlier, seeking a special exception to permit the expansion of existing self-service storage facility use in the Downtown Gateway DG zoning district. Is
And
the
Mr. Mayor,
applicant? Yes,
Mr. Mayor, I'll just note for the record again that this application was properly noticed in both the News Journal and the News Weekly. Affidavits of publication are part of the record, as long as photographs of posting of the property.
okay. Is the applicant or somebody representing Mr. DeMundi present?
Mr. DeMonday is here.
Okay, very good. Mr. DeMundi, good evening. The floor is yours.
Mr. DeMonday, you can go ahead and talk.
John, you might be on mute.
He's currently not muted in Zoom.
He is muted or is not?
He's not muted.
Okay. I wonder if he knows that he has to, John, you may have to, on the navigation bar on the top of your screen, you may have to unmute yourself.
It doesn't show as muted on the attendees list. That's interesting.
Marika, is he calling in on the phone or is he using a computer?
Right now he's through the computer, but Kim is going to try to call him real quick.
Okay.
While we're waiting to see if we can get the applicant connected, did everybody receive this communication dated 11/9/20? David, you're looking as if that did not come, or did you see this?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things came from Kim yesterday. I don't believe I saw anything on my inbox regarding this today.
Okay.
Is-
This may be, may be something that Mr. Mundy intends to read, so we'll see what he wants to do.
I sent it to the head of the Board of Adjustment. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, John, I think we hear you now.
You want me to read it to you? Would it be easier if I read it to you?
Now, we got a pretty good echo. I want me to go ahead and read it for you, or would you like to read it?
It's up to you, Mike.
We're getting a little echo from you, so I'll go ahead and read it into the record. This is BOA dated 11/9/20, 6:30. Hello, my name for the record is John A. DeMundi, petitioner for John DeMundi Enterprises LLC, 300 West Street Mini Warehouse Rentals. Again, I repeat, I'm disappointed that we can't meet face to face again. I've sent you and my legal advisor correspondence regarding your failure to approve my, quote, right to build, end quote, and won't repeat them unless asked. I think they speak for themselves. I have correspondence from your lawyer, Mr. Lasco, confirming my offer made to have the, quote, right to build, end quote, these units. This offer was in lieu of me seeking compensation for the, quote, taking, end quote, of my traditional use of my longstanding properties without my consent, its traditional usage of over 100 years, which made a living for my families during that time. I was zoned industrial during that period. I was obligated to apply to the BOA, paying $600 for their approval to do what I had to, traditionally done for a century. I chose this over lengthy and costly litigation. The other large landowners affected were rewarded with outrageous compared to pre-gateway values amounts of money for their properties, which they promptly sold. This was my choice. It was premised on an orderly procedure guaranteeing my continuance, except for exceptions and or legal infringements. This, though not orderly as it was, challenged every 5 total application by Mr. Lasco, who brokered the agreement for 1 or more petty observations. If there were exceptions, it had to go to Planning Commission, which none were subject to it. These types of petty objections to an orderly application are a violation of the city's, quote, right to build, end quote, agreement. If the city wishes to formally renege, we're prepared to begin litigation, compensation for the taking of our property and personal rights. We have stated, we have shown we are not subject to any of your nuanced regulations stated by the city to trigger screening. We have open public records. We have not in 100 years ever been successfully cited for physical disturbance. It seems you are trying to dictate taste. Physical objections to property conditions are not based on the public or authorities' perception, but by a consensus of legal, broad, diverse criteria. A Stepford community, as you suggest, here, society would in this world be considered a cultural and personally discriminatory abridgment of the Constitution. Legal objections to the rights to build were meant to be directed to the Planning Commission first. In this matter, as you continue to find fault with a petition without exceptions, it's as if you have decided to be judge and jury of cultural taste. Your direction to continue my petition by ordering us to retain a professional at great expense was without legal authority, even with a city lawyer present. Question it. Satisfy this petition objection that cause you to reject my right to make a living, epitomizing what's going wrong here. Make your ruling based on our legal, quote, right to continue to make a living. You agreed with it. If not, state your cause and let's move on. John DeMundi. John, Mr. DeMundi, is there anything else you'd like to add beyond that statement tonight?
Thank you for reading
it. Sure. Okay. It appears that are there any questions? Start with Mr. Athey and then Mr. Lasco. Any questions for the applicant?
For the applicant, no. In general, procedurally, yes. I can either kind of ask it now or defer.
Well, let's wait. Let's go through. If you have no questions for the applicant, Mr. Lasco, do you have any questions for the applicant?
No.
Okay. All right. Mr. Bergstrom, is there anything you'd like to add about this application at this point?
No?
Okay. All right. Mr. Athey, you had some procedural questions and then we'll invite if there's any public comment.
Just to clarify, and so essentially at the hearing a month or so back, we basically asked for Mr. DeMundi to retain the services of a professional to basically design a landscape screening, and deferred other action for 60 days, which this is within, to give the applicant an opportunity to kind of comment on that. So it sounds like the applicant, Mr. DeMundi, is basically not agreeing with that decision by the board. So I guess that puts us in a, I guess I'm just not totally understanding. I don't think we've ever really deferred a decision like this. Maybe it's a Dan Lasko question of that. This seems like that kind of puts us in a little bit of an odd spot, that we've made a conditional, we've signaled to the applicant of conditional approval, and the applicant basically hasn't accepted our conditions. So does that really just kind of throw it back in our laps and we decide how we want to do it?
This is Dan Lasko. You know, the applicant is entitled to supply whatever he wants to supply in support of his application. You know, the board invited him to use a professional to come up with some reasonable screening. When this DG zoning ordinance was adopted, it prohibited self-service storage facilities, but Mr. DeMundi is correct that an exception was made largely because of his operation. And essentially, the only thing that the city asked of him was that he provide a planted vegetation screen, primarily evergreen vegetation. So he came to the board on 2 prior occasions asking for expansion rights, and the board in both cases required landscape screening, to which he readily agreed. The problem, as I see it, is that that landscape screening wasn't maintained, and it really wasn't implemented in the way dictated by the board. So what we have here now is a continuation of his prior application. I should note for the record, in between the time of the hearing earlier this year and the present time, he did submit some photographs. I don't know if they're part of the record here, but indicating that he has placed with in 3 pots that he had out in the front of his property, he had replaced vegetation with some evergreen plantings. So I want to give him credit for that. He did do that part. So that's the state of the record, and the board gets to make a decision based upon the state of the record. We have a code that describes what are the requirements for a special exception in this circumstance, and we have an applicant who's made a record of what it is, and now the board gets to make a decision.
Okay.
Okay. Marika, is there anyone from the public that would like to make any comments?
Mr. Gross is here.
Okay. I'm going to turn my camera off because I think we got some serious feedback and echoes going on, and it may be, well, I'll try to keep it on. Sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Gross.
Again, good evening, board and esteemed mayor. The only question I really have, well, 2, is one, have you gotten an updated picture, Mr. Lasko or board, as to what today's look of his screening is? Did he provide that?
The applicants, this was his opportunity to provide some additional information.
Okay.
I do recall that I got a photograph sent at some point here that was a close-up of a plant, the tag of the plant indicating that it was an evergreen variety of some sort. That's what I recall. But it's the applicant's, you know, opportunity tonight, right now, to present evidence.
Okay, well, that was just my question. Has he, you know, over the past weeks, because I do see driving by there that there has been the forest is grown. So I wasn't sure if he had provided pictures to see if it came close enough to, like Mr. Athey's concern, is it enough to satisfy what you're looking for? And if not, at least he provided a current picture. Second is, I'm still a little concerned at the fact that the proposed project that he plans on doing in no way can be seen from any public space that I could see, because I've gone walked the property a little bit. So it seems like if you're basing the decision on this specific building request on its own merits, I don't believe you should stop them. If it's for past indignations or not following through, well, then that's a whole separate issue. But as far as his request currently, I don't see how it would affect the Gateway District or anybody else's way of living. I don't think it would detract. So that's my only two thoughts on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the public that would like to make any comments?
I'd like to make one before I leave.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, John.
Okay, he was unfortunately disconnected, but we're getting him back.
Okay.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead, John.
Mr. Demundi,
Thank you.
okay, Mr. Demundi, turn down
Okay.
your,
I think I'm ruthless. I sent pictures multiple times to every person on the Board of Adjustment, Jeff Berstrom. What you want me to do, make a video of it? And it's an open space here on the street. Anybody riding by could have seen it. I replaced both sides of the street. In front of my garage and my house has all this new vegetation. All in front of where my plants were killed by the city or DelDOT are replaced. They've all been replaced. So don't say I didn't provide pictures. I provided pictures plus public exposure. I've been out here for 3 weeks. And you mean nobody ride by here has seen them? Mr. Berstrom has seen them. Mr. Berstrom sent me a letter saying that this professional landscape guy wasn't even in the code. He shouldn't even have been mentioned. And then I'm catching heck here from not engaging a professional landscape guy. I don't have to, and it shouldn't be any disparaging thing to me that I didn't have to do it either. And another thing is, basing this application, as Mr. Gross said, and I've said it 100 times, has nothing to do with what you didn't like happened with another application. You can't double jeopardy me on this. You either approve this based on its merits. It's not even visible from any place. Plus, I replaced the vegetation. In fact, I enhanced it from when you killed it or the DelDOT killed it with a weed killing. And then you say, I was neglectful. I kept that thing watered every day for 2 years. Nobody said anything. And then when you killed it, all of a sudden you rode by and you tried to turn down my application. Something isn't right here. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, since Mr. Bergstrom may have some factual information, perhaps you can tell us if anything you see on site now. Perhaps that will help the applicant build a record here.
Certainly, if you'd like me to talk, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Okay, I think Mr. Gross was entirely correct that the new buildings that he's applying for can't be seen from the street. I will leave it up to members of the board to decide if the screening requirements apply in that case. But Mr. DeMonde did in fact go to some effort to replace vegetation in the pots that he had put up there before. Whether or not they were sufficient to meet the original requirements of the board, that's a matter for someone else, but things look fine. I will agree with Mr. DeMonde that I'm pretty sure that Del Dot's weed control person sprayed all his plantings in front of the property, because they died very suddenly. All of them. So that might have been disheartening. Other than that,
Well-
the property looks as
well-
best it's looked. So
Well, Mr. Bergstrom, let me ask this question. Did you measure off how far apart the plantings are?
yes, there's certainly there's one per section of fence, and they're much farther apart than 5 feet.
And
think-
did you measure the height of the plantings?
Well, they're only a few feet tall.
Are they 4 feet or more?
Off the deck, yeah.
Okay, off the
Off the
Plotting-
concrete.
pot included, pot included.
Yes, I'd say he complied with that.
Okay. Anything else you want to add? Are they evergreen plantings?
Yes, they are evergreen plantings.
And are they only along the 7th Street side? Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. That's all.
Okay. All right. All right, if there's no other comments for this matter, then it would be my intention to close the hearing part of our proceedings and move to the business part of our agenda, reverting first back to the application that we heard first from the Methodist Church.
Okay,
Is there a motion?
so move to the business meeting.
Second.
Okay, any objection? Hearing none. Okay, the hearing is now closed. Thank you, everybody. All right. All right, let's go to the first item tonight, which was the application filed by the Newcastle United Methodist Church at 510 Delaware Street, and for discussion. I'll open this one up. I expressed a bit of frustration, and I will communicate that again, and I will make it clear to the trustees of the church that this is not the first time that we've had a confusing episode with the city government. And I find that frustrating, because I don't think the rules are too difficult to follow if you take the initiative to call and ask and get the answers that you need. We first had a conversation and some back and forth about the faux brick that they wanted to use in their sign. That led to some accommodations, but according to, they've already bought the sign. So, everybody had to consider the expense that a nonprofit organization such as a church would have to encounter if they had to go back and redo something. And similarly, now we have the supposed purchase of 18 vinyl windows, because again, somehow have not been able to figure out that rules are rules, and that if you're building anything at any time, it is always a standard and good practice to get in touch with the authorities to find out what the rules are, because the rules even from year to year change. We just did a update of the Uniform Building Code in our city, as other municipalities around the country have done, because technology, building materials and things like that, standards and techniques all are not static. They do move, and they do modulate and change. I know that there are a number of windows here that have very limited visibility to the street and to the public. And I will say this, as someone who served on the Historic Area Commission, I was and remain a proponent of alternative materials. But I will tell you, not all materials, not all alternatives are the same. There are some that are very inexpensive. They don't last. They don't look good. They don't wear well, and they are not something that you would probably want in any public space or private home, for that matter. I'm reluctant to give an approval without Mr. Bergstrom taking a really good look at the proposed product that's intended to be used here. As I stated earlier, there are alternatives of a really serious quality and look that make close inspection very difficult to discern the real from the replacement using alternatives without getting right up next to them. Some of the replacements have grain in them. They look really just like their wood brethren. They are good enough for places like the White House, Winterthur, Williamsburg, and the like. However, having said that, you also have a conflict in policy where you have energy efficiency going one direction, historic preservation another. So these are the things that enter my thought process on this. I know that, and we had one public comment that said, well, you have to kind of discern between different vinyl products as opposed to making a blanket statement. When the design requirements were approved, I think you have to understand that there are literally thousands of these products on the market. And to differentiate between each and every single one of them is an enormous burden. And there are products that are brought on the market every day, and there are products that are taken off every day. So it was the decided view of the historic architect and the preservation community that vinyl was just rejected. Alternatives, yes, because there's a limited number that are of good quality and have graining and have textures that mimic wood. And that was befitting of certain contributing buildings. Others that are very historic, it's not even an option. If you live in a historic property, you're street facing, you're going to have to use wood replacement. So there are, that's how the decisions were made based on the Historic Area Review Commission adopted by the council. And since that time, have been implemented throughout the city quite successfully, both by commercial and private residents, property owners alike. I don't have any concern with this particular location because I've walked that area and absolutely nobody would see that. I'm not particularly convinced that this is outside sightlines, and there are adjacent property owners who do have a view of back windows in the parking lot. They would now, admittedly, and let me be clear, it is from the back of their own properties. So you have the backs of properties that abut, not public right-of-ways, but you do have adjoining property owners. And I think it was Mr. Lasko that asked whether or not there'd been any effort to reach out to the adjacent property owners. And I don't believe there has been. I'll pause at that point. Mr. Lasko or Mr. Athey?
Well, I guess I'll go. Yeah, it's an interesting case and kind of a tough call, but I think I'm inclined to, I guess the word would be overrule Hack at this point. I think in favor of the applicants, I truly do believe it was, this was not an intentional egregious act, rather unfortunate circumstances, but and it's one of the reasons I asked a clarification question. It is a little unfortunate, I guess, that the city, although I should also say Newcastle, I believe, is among the more communicative municipalities I'm aware of, but still, if something happens to somebody's property and there are now different requirements of it, again, with benefit of hindsight, it would have been good if, letters had been sent out or something of that nature, but apparently it was not. The fact that, or it appears that it's a fact that you really couldn't distinguish these windows from the street, from any sort of a view shed. You started to go there a moment, Mr. Mayor, which is what I'm still kind of struggling with a little bit is, and again, I give the church the benefit of the doubt that these would be certainly not cheap windows, very high quality. Mr. Mayor, I don't know if it was a proposal or you were just kind of thinking out loud of asking Mr. Bergstrom to take a look at the products. I have kind of mixed feelings on that, as much as I always value Jeff's opinion. In a way, if we made that a condition of some sort of an approval, that in a way we're giving Jeff a standing that Hack doesn't have. And that to me seems a little bit weird, but I'm also not comfortable. As you guys on the board, I always worry about precedent. And if there isn't some degree of assurance that these are quality products, that I would be worried it would come back to haunt us at some point. So I think if which is why I asked all the questions on the number of windows that were previously replaced, et cetera. If all of the windows were currently wood and they were kind of just starting from scratch, I would be pretty hesitant to overrule Hack. But the fact that half of them already are vinyl, it's been that way for many, many years. That gives me at least more feeling. I don't think grandfathered is really the right word, but let's just say the fact that half the windows existed, and since then the requirements changed on the property. I don't know, maybe that is a grandfathering or at least a semi-grandfathering. So those are kind of my thoughts. I'll just say inclined to go ahead and overrule Hack. But I wouldn't call that a super strong inclination, but that's kind of where my head's at.
Good. Mr. Lasko, before you comment, I want to respond to this because I think it's important to get on the record. There were there was the creation of the Historic Area Review Commission, which was deliberated and created. There were months of work that went into that effort. The proceedings of that were all public. There were repeated maps and pictures and descriptions that were put in the news, put in several editions of the newspaper throughout the entire proceedings. There are a number of parishioners that live in the city, not too many, but some. And there was ample opportunity, and I would just go this far. I think the city and I think the communications, because we do have a paper that comes out weekly, and it's a small city. There's a lot of talk. We've not had this kind of a defense suggested by anybody else in the last few years, to my recollection. And I don't hear that kind of communication from people around the community, whether they're business owners or their residents. I think, therefore, that speaks volumes to the understanding that people have of the fact that they live in a historic area. There are rules and there are expectations of compliance. Mr. Lasko.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll go through a couple of things that I don't think matter for anything. The fact that they've spent money on the windows already, irrelevant to me. The fact that there was a change in the parameters of the historic zone such that they weren't aware, or apparently weren't aware, that they're subject to HAC's purview, irrelevant to me. The fact is that they are, and the fact is that the guidelines exist. What I see is guidelines that say for a contributing building, alternative materials for replacement windows may be considered if they're not visible from the public right-of-way, not neighbors' properties, but from the public right-of-way. And it specifically says vinyl clad windows are not appropriate on elevations visible from the public right-of-way. And the testimony I've heard here is that 16 out of the 18 windows to be replaced are not visible from the public right-of-way. Only 2 are, and they're a half a city block away, or something along those lines, but they're quite distant. So those 2 windows are the only ones that give me pause. And I think to myself, to require 2 wood windows when virtually everything else is vinyl is kind of an absurd result. And I just don't see requiring a hodgepodge. To me, it's putting form over substance. I appreciate that there are vinyl window products that are poor quality, but I did hear testimony that these windows have a lifetime guarantee. They have the mullions to match the remaining windows, all of which are vinyl. And I just don't see this as a big deal. I think the applicant is entitled to relief for all those reasons I just gave you. So again, the only one that's close are those 2 windows adjacent to the cemetery, but well back from the public right-of-way. And I asked Mr. Bergstrom whether or not anybody could discern that they are vinyl from the public right-of-way. And I think he said if you had binoculars, you could tell. Otherwise, not so much. So I think I'm going to, all those reasons, I think I favor overruling HAC on this. I do want to comment about precedent. I don't like the idea of precedent. So it's something that is bothersome to me. But it strikes me that the only real precedent here would be those 2 windows that are adjacent to the graveyard and visible from public view, or from a public right-of-way rather. And I think that they're far enough away that they can be distinguished from other cases where passerbys on public right-of-way could really and truly discern a vinyl product. The other thing is about the neighbors and their view. I don't think it's relevant because it's not spelled out in the guidelines. But I note that there were no neighbors in opposition to this. The property was posted. The notice went out in the newspaper, 2 newspapers. And just as the applicants should have known they're in a historic district, any complaining neighbors should have known they had an opportunity to complain this evening, and they haven't. So for all those reasons, I'm inclined to favor the appeal and reverse the HAC.
Okay.
And I'll make a motion to do just that.
I'll second the motion.
All right. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And I'm going to abstain because of my membership in the church. But they have the requisite votes, and the decision by the Historic Area Commission has been overturned. And they are free to work with Mr. Bergstrom to obtain the requisite permits and replace their windows. All right, that concludes proceedings on that application. The second item for us to discuss is, in our business meeting, is the continuance of the application filed by John Demendi Enterprises of 300 West 7th Street. I will make some comments first, and then go ahead and ask both of you for comments. I feel that we have, it is within our scope to ask for screening and ask for appropriate amenities, as we have done with the Sailing Club, as we have done with the SPCA, to correct some things that we think will improve the quality of the streetscape and or the sight lines from different properties. I would note that it is possible to see the back of where these buildings will be. And I know that's not necessarily been not been part of a discussion, but when you do travel down South or Young Street, you can see where the pads are and where this building is intended, where these buildings are intended to go. And so while that, yes, it is fair to say that they are not visible more than likely from 7th Street, they are visible from the backside, I believe. I think this was a missed opportunity. There was time to clean up and perhaps make the entire sight line and the frontage of this look better. I think it's a missed opportunity. The goal here was not to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a landscape architect, but to use somebody other than a neighborhood lawn care service for advice. It was somebody that has some experience and could have offered advice and judgment in a scale that would have been worthy of a conversation. And I think it's too bad that we didn't have that tonight. So those are my thoughts at this point. Mr. Athey, Mr. Lasko?
Yeah. I guess it's two statements. One, I assuming any pictures or what have you would have come by email. The only pictures I have from Mr. Demundi are dated September 23 and September 25. I think September 23 was actually, he sent during the previous hearing. The September 25, I'm not sure exactly what it is showing. That might more or less be what Mr. Bergstrom described. So I'm not sure if that was placed after or not. I guess if the applicant's position is that he's made a good faith effort to comply with what we conditioned, I guess I would have liked to have perhaps seen more, because I just don't know what I would hang my hat on. Here we go to that precedent thing again. What I'd be really concerned about, we conditioned an approval back on the September 23rd meeting on a professionally prepared plan, et cetera. And the applicant came back and essentially said he wasn't intending to hire a professional, and is in essence asking the board to basically back off or change its conditions. I think that would be a pretty tough precedent to set. So any conditions we set from this point forward, applicants could think, well, I'll just, I'm not going to accept it, and I'm going to go back and see if they change it. And I'd be pretty worried about that. So I guess I need to stick by my original. I'm actually reviewing the meeting minutes. Some of the statements I made back in September, the intent, certainly the DG district is certainly the aesthetics. Mr. Mayor, good choice of words, missed opportunity. So I guess I'm inclined to keep the conditions as they were stated in September. And I suppose if the applicant doesn't meet those conditions, then the variance won't be approved.
Mr. Falasko?
All right, well, first, really quickly, it's a special exception application,
I
not
knew
a
you were gonna
variance.
catch me on
Okay.
that. I realized after I said it.
Really don't hold it against Mr. Demey that he didn't hire a landscape architect to provide some plans here. I think that was the reason for the continuance, because at the September hearing, the board was discussing amongst itself, what could the applicant do to properly and reasonably screen this facility in the manner that is consistent with section 230-21.1D, which requires screening for an expansion of a self-storage facility in this zone. And that was, Mr. Demonte talks about the deal that was made. It really isn't a deal. An ordinance was passed without his objection because it gave him the right to expand. And the one thing the city wanted in exchange for that expansion right was some reasonable screening and landscaping. And we all struggled a little bit. What could he do to screen this site reasonably, given the limitations of the site? So we were kicking it around as the board, and the thought occurred to all of us really that could really be benefited by engaging a landscape architect to give him some professional ideas on what could be done here reasonably. Now, he chose not to go in that direction, and I'm not going to hold that against him because an applicant's entitled to present whatever case they want. One point that he has made is, and he keeps saying, you killed it, the vegetation, whatever vegetation that was out there. And I don't think there's any evidence that anybody from the city killed it. So I don't hold that as being anything that is impactful in the decision. I think Mr. Bergstrom said DelDOT may have sprayed there, and there was a precipitous decline in the health of whatever vegetation was there. But I also don't believe the vegetation there was what was supposed to be there in the first place. And I'll get to that in more detail in a minute. But the other point I wanted to address is Ms. Rose had testified and the applicant had testified that you can't see these new buildings from the street. Now, the mayor has countered that by saying that you can see it on the South Street or back side. And so that's one point against that argument. But the bigger point, I think, is within the body of 230-21.1D, which says that an application to expand an existing self-storage facility use shall have visual screening to shield said use. So we're not talking about the specific buildings that he wants to expand. We're talking about the use. It's the mini storage facility that's the issue, and it needs to be properly screened. So I went back again and looked at what we approved in April of 2019. And it was a slightly different board. It was a different mayor at that time. Mayor Gambacorta was on the board at that point, but otherwise it was Mr. Athey and myself as well. And at that time, we approved an expansion, and the board was satisfied with screening in the form of evergreen plantings on 5-foot centers, the height of which shall be a minimum of 4 feet, including the height of pots along the western part of the property, along the front line from the existing 1-story building to the Barnett property, and a reasonable equivalence on the eastern part of the property, with the exception of the existing entrance. And I can't see rejecting Mr. Demonte's application if he can meet that standard. If it was good enough the last time, why isn't it good enough now? The only additional requirement I would have, and I think the board's mistake the last time, was that we did not condition it upon the applicant continuously maintaining that landscaping screen in a neat and healthy condition, replacing plantings as they need to be replaced. Strikes me that that should be an additional condition imposed at this point, because that's where the real failing. If he had done exactly what was ordained back in April of 2019, I wouldn't have any problem with this. What bothers me is that when we did do this last hearing in September, there were 3 loud pots with plants in them. And it's not living up to the spirit of the decision. And that to me is problematic because it provides absolutely no screening from the self-storage use, which is the one thing that this code requires the applicant to expand his use. So that's my thinking on it. I'm prepared to make a motion along those lines. Don't know if there's further comment or discussion on any of those thoughts.
Hearing none, we'll take a motion.
Okay. I'll take a stab at that. I make a motion to approve the requested special exception based upon the 3 conditions contained in the April 9, 2019 Board of Adjustment application on this matter for this property, with the additional requirement, the applicant shall continually maintain such landscaping screen in a neat and healthy condition, making appropriate replacements as necessary. And, well, that's the motion.
Discussion. I have a couple questions. So based on the frontage, and I drive by the property frequently. Not that I look at it all the time, but I have noticed that yes, there have been some movement and also some upgrades to the vegetation. So it appears that there, and don't hold me to this, I think there are maybe 3 or 4 pots. I'm just curious if they were supposed to be 5 feet apart, approximately how many of those, if you go the length of what was described in the decision a couple of years ago, what's the grand total of the number of pots given the frontage that was intended to be screened?
I don't have that information, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if Mr. Bergstrom's aware.
I mean, I'm trying to get an understanding. Are we talking 10 more? Are we talking 2 more? Are we talking 30 more? I mean, what's the obligation?
You, Jeff.
Jeff, you're on mute.
Sorry. 10 more would be another 50 feet, and he's got about another 100 feet to do, I think, so.
Okay, just trying to make sure that we understand the scale.
Right.
And I'll add one more thing. There were 3 conditions in the April 9, 2019 decision. So I'll read them just to get them in the record. The first was a continuation of the existing fence across the western entrance that is to be closed off. So let me stop there. Mr. Bergstrom, was that ever done?
I believe there was a gate put up, yes.
Okay. Okay. The second was the landscape screening in the form of evergreen plantings on 5-foot centers, the height of which shall be 4 feet, including the height of pots, along the western part of the property, along the front line from the existing 1-story building to the Barnett property, and in reasonable equivalence on the eastern part of the property, with the exception of the existing entrance. So the pots that so let me stop there. The pots that exist now are strictly along 7th Street, correct?
Yes.
The third condition was construction to commence within 1 year of the decision, and the construction of all 3 units be completed within 2 years. And I'll remind the board, condition of that nature is a requirement for any special exception. You have to give a time limit for either commencement or completion of the proposed improvements. So again, the only other additional condition I suggested was the requirement that it be continuously maintained in a healthy condition with appropriate replacement plantings made. Now, I will say one more thing about that motion, because I still have trepidation about it in the sense that it's challenging to enforce. We can make the condition, but if he doesn't abide by it, whether voluntarily or inadvertently, doesn't matter to me, but if the conditions are not abided by, the building already up, the use is already in place, there's not much the city can do about it. But I would say that if the applicant would not abide by that condition, certainly would not be in favor of further expansion of this facility. Because at that point, it strikes me as bad faith.
I really would like to reply to that.
We're in our
Sorry,
business meeting
sorry.
now.
We're at a business meeting now. Mr. Athey.
It seems like this, I like the last condition. With hindsight in 2019, it would have been good to have added, but I'm not comfortable with the point I made a few moments ago that we made conditions at September 23rd, and now we're basically revisiting them and we're going to change them. With benefit of hindsight, it would have been good if we had made these the April, whatever it was, 2019 conditions, repeated them instead of putting a new condition on, and now we're going to kind of backpedal a little bit and say, well, we'll go back to the 2019. So Dan, I'm really putting you on the spot. Can you why are you kind of acquiescing here? If you don't mind me using that choice of words.
Well, I'll give you two. If you're talking about the condition of requiring a landscape architect.
Yes.
Okay. That was a condition of the continuance, okay? Now, you can't force an applicant to tell them how to present their case. We certainly were giving them a strong recommendation in this case that it would be helpful to their cause to come with that kind of evidence to present. But the fact that the applicant said, no, I'm not going to do that, doesn't strike me as prohibitive to the application. It's nowhere in the code that he has to provide landscape architect plans. It certainly would have been advisable. The board certainly thought it was advisable. I think it certainly could have helped his case here. And who knows, it may have come up with, the landscape architect may have come up with ideas that were more economical, more permanent, easier to maintain. But we aren't given the benefit of that because he chose not to do it. But to me, that was merely a condition of the continuance. The continuance was granted. He chose not to do it. So you have evidence before you that you still had, you essentially had it back there in September. You didn't have to grant the continuance and you would have had to make a decision then too. So to me, it's not that important. The second point, I guess, is I get back to the idea that if in April of 2019, this board was okay with granting that special exception based upon conditions that were listed out in that April 9, 2019 decision. I mean, 2 of the 3 members of the board are the same people. If we were okay with an expansion of his operation then, why is it problematic now?
Yeah, well, I got an answer for that. I'm looking at the meeting minutes, and I guess it was my statement from September where I added, Mr. Athey added that the conditions in the 2019 decisions clearly did not work for the long term. So I was already on record for saying I didn't think that was, maybe that was back to your point, Dan, of the, the maintenance thereof. And I'm not so sure if the landscape architect was a condition of the continuance or was actually part of the original motion of adding that condition. If there was a way to assure with some reasonableness that it would work, I guess here we had a discussion a month and a half ago that what the board decided in 2019 basically wasn't working for whatever the reason. So it seems clearly I'm not real comfortable for just kind of reverting to that, to those conditions again.
Well, yeah, I remember from the September hearing, Dave, that, Mr. Bergstrom was asked about it, and he basically said, well, it was the board's fault. You didn't require maintenance. And so I think we can correct that by requiring maintenance. Whether the applicant abides by that and lives up to that is a matter of good faith on his part. And this is why I say, to come back to the board in a couple of years and to say, I want to expand further. And if there's a bunch of dead plants out there again, now the applicant clearly would understand, if my conditions were met here and adopted, that he's got to maintain them. He's got to replace them as needed. The idea is to screen the self-storage use, not the 2 new buildings, the whole use. That's what needs to be done to make this part of the DG zone, to make this part of the fabric of the city, to meet the goals of this DG zone.
And let me comment on that. When we met and we talked about the challenges that a very close by property had, the Sailing Club, they wanted to expand fences. They wanted, and was big and white, and it was going to be, frankly, a bit of an eyesore. And frankly, not as attractive as part of the fence at the subject property tonight. Part of the fence is really nice, part of it not so nice. The goal is to improve the entire look of the area, and the thumb on the scale with the Sailing Club to landscape that nicely was to block the big white fence so it didn't become a target for graffiti, so it looked nice. And frankly, it would help the adjacent property owners, including the applicant tonight, so that he didn't have this big white wall near his own residence, and that it would look nice. And that was the expectation that we gave and the direction that we leveled onto the Sailing Club. And quite honestly, I have the same expectation tonight. A screen is a screen. A screen is, the code's quite clear. The screen should be to basically screen the buildings, the use from the street. I'm not particularly keen on a plant every 5 feet, to be perfectly blunt. We didn't ask that of the Sailing Club folks. When we had the SPCA in, we talked about taking down a bunch of crummy old fence and actually doing the job right. They had some non-conforming uses. This was the opportunity to clean up and make better overall a larger area, and they missed the opportunity. I feel we're kind of in that spot tonight. I feel like there's an opportunity here to improve the property and improve the streetscape to the benefit of the property owner and the adjacent properties. And I can't feel, in all good consciousness, I can't ask of the Sailing Club property to do this one way and then provide a different yardstick in a different way for a property that is literally 50 paces away from one another. That to me seems patently unfair, because if the shoe were on the other foot, I'd be taking Mr. Demundy's side on this case. If he previously had improved fence and put up all this landscaping, and now he watched his neighbor not have to do similarly, that would be unfair to him. But the shoe's on the other foot tonight. So I'm not going to support this. I can't, because it's the spirit of this is to screen all the buildings.
Mr. Mayor, if I can interrupt for a moment, I want to make certain you make the distinction that the Sailing Club application was for a variance. Okay, this is a special exception, which is a permitted use. The variance is not. It's just that this special exception mandates reasonable screening. And I'll also point out that the Sailing Club, I think, required a continuous hedge, as I recall. I could be wrong on that.
I think it did.
So we're not required, my suggestion doesn't require continuous screening because of the nature of the property involved. It's sidewalk and it's thick concrete, and there's not a lot of room unless we're going to
That's correct. There are things you could do behind the fence, though, that would provide ample opportunity to not have to take up concrete to provide screening. And let me just say this. Yes, I understand the difference between the applications. However, for the benefit of the surrounding properties, including the property owner himself, And for the public that passes through there, they're not going to differentiate between a special use, a special exception. They're going to see the visual, the streetscape. The goal here is to make the streetscape look as attractive as possible within reason, but make it look good.
Well, shall I test my motion?
I don't think it's been seconded yet. I think you already did test it.
Okay. Does somebody else
Um,
have another motion to make then, if mine's not going to be seconded?
I need to kind of think out loud here, which I hate doing because I can't frame it in my brain otherwise. I can understand the argument, a professional landscape architect.
Let me ask you to pause. Let me ask you to pause right there.
Yeah, please do. 'Cause it's not coming to my head. Thank you.
Because the discussion last time was in part brought upon where we are today. Okay. I wasn't part of this group that had made a prior discussion about the provisions in the code which say make a screen for the business, not these two buildings, but for the operation, right? Okay, so here we are today. The goal was not to ask somebody, a well-meaning person at Home Depot or someone who cuts grass for a living, what do you think, and get some advice from them. The goal was to actually have a conversation with someone who's in the business to actually, or not, but have a conversation and come back with a plan that was reasonable to provide full screening. That was the intent. It wasn't to jam up Mr. DeMundi to go spend thousands on a landscape architect. The goal here was to express a level of seriousness to come back with something meaningful and reasonable for purposes of a conversation.
Right, thank you. I think you've said what I was kind of trying to get in my head. I guess with benefit of hindsight, the professional landscape architect, professional arborist, but I do have to agree with Mr. Mayor, where I think you were going with this, is some better good faith effort, somebody who can opine on the challenges of the site. And to Mr. DeMundi's credit, I think I said this at the last meeting, this will not be the easiest thing in the world to do, but some level of professionalism. So I guess we're, what do we do? Continue this again for 60 days and ask him to come back with I'm not necessarily comfortable doing that either.
Well, can I ask a question? I want to be clear about this. Are you saying that you would reject this application merely because he didn't spend money on a landscape architect? I think that's problematic. There's nothing in the code that says he has to hire a landscape architect.
Correct.
Okay. There just isn't. If you're hanging your hat on that, I think it's problematic. If you're hanging your hat on the fact that he didn't come with a plan prepared by a landscape architect, the guy who runs the the grass cutting business, or my 18-year-old who's in high school, it doesn't matter who the plan comes from. But if you're rejecting this application because he hasn't come with a reasonable landscaping screen plan, I get it. But I don't think you should say, well, there was no landscape architect here, therefore it must be rejected. That strikes me as out of line.
Okay, I appreciate the clarity. However, that's kind of what the previous motion, whether it was a motion on the continuance, whether it was a condition of the continuance or a condition of the motion.
I think you need to get past that. I think you need to get past that.
Scrutinize the minutes, but no, honestly, I don't want to deny the application, but I'm trying to think of a way, and I maybe we do need to continue it. Now that Mr. DeMundi's heard yet more deliberations on this. I guess I'm already admitting with benefit of hindsight, maybe the professional LA or the professional arborist might not have really been required, but some level of professionalism, a better thought out plan, and maybe some like a maintenance schedule, Dan, to go on the point that you brought up, which I think is definitely valid. something that gives us a little bit more to go on. I'm just not comfortable going back to 2019 because that didn't work the first time for whatever reason. So I think it's not realistic to think it's going to work the second time. So I'll go ahead and try this on for size then. Move that we continue the hearing for another 60 days and give the applicant another opportunity to prepare a plan that will demonstrate screening of the use, as well as a maintenance schedule or some level of maintenance activities that will occur. All right, we're 0 for 2 then on motions thus far. Not sure
Yeah,
that's ever happened.
I don't think another continuance. First of all, I doubt the applicant wants another continuance. He wants to build a building. We're going into the winter months. So I don't think that's particularly helpful to the applicant, and having had the opportunity once and said, no, I'm not going to spend a nickel. I think it would be a waste of time. I think we need to make a decision. He wants to expand a current facility. Apparently the only thing he wants to put out there are the 3 or 4 pots that are out there. And you're going to have to decide for yourself whether or not that's adequate. You know, if you're not, can't get a second on my motion, which requires a more stringent landscape equivalent to what we already approved.
Procedural question then, to Dan, I suppose. I'm not aware if the motion is, if the special exception is denied, I don't believe there's anything preventing an applicant from returning the next day and reapplying, correct? I mean, it's not like, I know some, like if you like deny a rezoning, you have to wait a year, and there are, you know, a lot of jurisdictions have various requirements along those lines. I'm not aware of a situation like that in Newcastle regarding special exceptions before this board.
I'm not aware of it. Jeff, are you aware of a sunsetting provision like that?
No, not for a special exception. I don't believe so.
Okay.
I did want to comment. We found out information that there are 7 pots with the evergreens in them now.
Well, the evidence is closed. You can't bring in evidence now. We're in our business meeting.
I'm just stating.
You're providing evidence. It's closed.
Wow.
The applicant could have said that. You could have said that before. It's done.
Okay.
That's not the record. I'll renew my motion to approve it based upon the April 9, 2019 conditions, plus the condition that the applicant continuously maintain the landscaping screen in a neat and healthy condition, appropriate replacements in a prompt manner as needed. How about give me a second? You can test it and vote it down if you don't like it.
I don't like seconding things I
I'm
may not ultimately support. You know, you're and I don't even know if might take me a moment to find the site plan. If we had very high reason to think that the applicant would be returning, in other words, if a good percentage of the property was still undeveloped, he had plenty of room for more, here it is, for more units. In other words, something we could, have the teeth to come back later and say, you've got to do this or else we're not going to let you put more units in. But actually now looking at the site plan, that northeast corner of the property is pretty much vacant, as well as an extreme western part. So, and if Mr. DeMundy's business sense is correct, and I think he testified this previously, that with all the other development going on around town is going to result in more business, he will probably, I think it's certainly possible he'd come back looking for additional special exception requests.
I'm not going to second it. The applicant, we took a step that I did not know this, but based on the tenure that both of you have, you indicated that an extension was quite rare, if maybe even unprecedented. The intervening time, we got back communications, not about a landscape screening plan, but we got communications back about taking of property, the rezoning, a number of issues that aren't presently before us right now. So I think this was a missed opportunity. I'm going to vote to deny this because we didn't take the time we had to have a conversation tonight about what screening could look like. That wasn't the conversation. We're talking about a number of things tonight. We're sitting here trying to divine a screening plan for the applicant. And I don't think that's necessarily what we should do. We asked, gave some extra time for the applicant to come back and provide that for us. And so we could engage in a conversation and put this to bed and hopefully with an agreement to be off to the races. We get the screening that we think is appropriate, go build his buildings, we'd be done. But we didn't get a plan. We got nothing back. So at this point, he's welcome to come back some other day. But at this point, I'm not inclined to go a step further. We've provided a number of weeks in intervening time for him to deliberate over this. And here we are.
So we need a motion then.
Okay, I'll make a motion to deny the special exception.
Second that. Mr. Lasko.
I want to find a way to approve this. However, he hasn't provided a reasonable landscape plan. I mean, that's what the code requires. He didn't abide by the 2019 conditions, but this isn't a matter of punishing him for that. It's not a matter of, who killed the plants, DelDOT, the city, whoever. The issue is there reasonable screening? And to my colleague's point here on the board, the conditions that were used in April of 2019 weren't sufficient to ensure an ongoing reasonable landscape screen. And what we have before us now is no real plan other than he's placed some pots out there and the record's not even clear how many pots there are because he chose not to provide that information. So I guess I vote in favor of the motion for those reasons.
Mr. Tracy.
Okay, well, I made the motion, so I'm going to support my own motion. A lot of the same reasons, Mr. Lasko, and I will also state, I really want to approve this as well. But as would have been pointed out, Mr. Mayor, again, your missed opportunity. I'm just not comfortable with the April 2019. It didn't work the first time. I don't think there's any reason to get it to work the second time. Even if something had been presented tonight, not from an LA, but at least something reasonably thought out, I think I probably could have gone along with it. But it is, again, Mr. Mayor, you said quite eloquently, that's not the discussion. This is not the discussion we all wanted to have this evening. And it's very unfortunate that we did. And why I asked a question a moment ago is if this motion passes, Mr. Mundy can file another one tomorrow. Once now that he's heard yet more deliberations by us and what the board would be inclined to accept and not accept. So admittedly, it's a little bit of a step back, but it's not like he can't return and after more consideration. So I'm going to support the motion as well.
I'm going to support the motion for the reasons that I stated previously. We offered to have a delay in deliberations so we would have a discussion about what appropriate screening looked like. The goal was to have a serious conversation about that, but we don't, I don't even know the length of the frontage that we're trying to cover, what his view of what that would look like, what our expectation might be. We have nothing to go on. And for those reasons, going to come back and you want to reapply and have a thoughtful conversation about screening and code compliant discussion about screening the property, happy to engage in that conversation. But for those reasons, I'm going to support the motion.
But I think we
Okay.
should make clear that the board is not requiring or insisting on a landscape architect design plan.
That
Just
is correct.
something reasonably well thought out that provides reasonable screening consistent with the code. That's all.
Yep.
Something that can be maintained, something with some permanency.
All right. I think we've concluded our business here tonight. Do we have
Motion
any
to
other
adjourn.
business?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.
Good evening.
Good night.